Welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. We are so fortunate to have with us today the editor of practicalesg.com, Lawrence Heim. Welcome, Lawrence. We're so pleased to have you here today.
Thank you, Pam. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to try my best to answer your questions. Just don't throw me any hard ones, okay?
Exactly. So let's start with your background and how did you get into ESG?
So I actually started in environmental compliance management back in the mid 80s as a legal assistant for a partner in environmental law practice at Vincent and Elkins, and kind of progressed rather than taking the legal route. I went into the technical side of things, went into technical environmental compliance management with a consulting firm. And then that's when this thing called environmental management systems really first started coming around. And that was, to a very large extent, really the real seed for what became sustainability, which then has morphed now into ESG with a couple other stops on the way. So as I kind of grew through the technical consulting side, I went in-house with at that time, they were publicly traded Fortune 120 manufacturer, Georgia Pacific. Moved from there into the risk management side, traditional risk management side, and was part of the founding of the environmental risk consulting practice at Marsh USA, an insurance broker, and learned a tremendous amount about traditional risk management that I had no idea about, but I've now found that to be extremely valuable to understanding how things work now, and actually how a lot of ESG professionals are kind of missing the boat in a lot of ways in terms of how we think about things. Mm-hmm. And then went back into technical consulting for quite a while, really focusing on auditing, management systems, compliance management, auditing internationally. Went from there to an industry association, Responsible Minerals Initiative, which has a lot to do with responsible supply chain management and auditing. And now I ended up here. So it's been a bit of a path. When I started, I had a full head of hair. Of course, now the only hair I have is on the front of my face. So it's been a bit of a path, but it's been, we're almost 40 years into it now.
And in those 40 years, just the way you've described it, you've picked up all the pieces of the puzzle, which make you incredibly well suited for this ESG role. So Practical ESG is part of CCRcorp. So explain to us what CCRcorp is first, and then why, when, and how did they launch practicalesg.com? And then a follow-on question, how did they find you, or how did you find them? Because it just seems like a perfect match.
Well, CCRcorp got started about 45 years ago, I think, and they came out of a former SEC, in-house SEC attorney, Jesse Brill, and he realized that there was a lot of information that the SEC was producing for publicly traded companies that wasn't getting out to the companies who needed it particularly effectively. So he went out on his own and he started this newsletter, and it focused on securities law and making sure that those in the securities realm here in the United States were getting the information that they need. That has continued to be really the foundation of CCRcorp, and we've got several other kind of sister publications and websites that go along with it. But the corporatecounsel.net really is kind of as I said, the foundation of what CCRcorp provides. And it's over the past 40 years, it's become extremely well known in the securities realm, and has been quite a very well-known reference in that. And we have things like Section 16 and compensation standards and a couple other things. A few years ago, they realized they were beginning to get inundated with questions about ESG that went beyond the traditional securities world, and that wasn't something that CCRcorp really had knowledge of in-house. I connected with CCRcorp several years ago as one of the experts that they asked to join on an annual webinar about conflict minerals, because I was at that time very active in conflict minerals and was extremely familiar with the rule itself, having been there since even before the rule was promulgated. And so that's how I got to know CCRcorp and the editors there. And when they made the decision, when the company made the decision to launch a standalone product, I just happened to be on the end of the phone when Liz Dunshee at the time, the managing editor at the time, kind of posed the question. So happened to luck into that one, I think.
And when was that? When did they start practicalesg.com?
Let's see, this was 2021, I believe. We obviously, I came in and we had a lot of work to do before we even launched anything on the website. So there was probably 8 months to a year, I think, of work before we actually had an official presence on the website.
So given your connection to corporate counsel, let's dive in a little bit. What do you think is the biggest ESG challenge that in-house corporate counsel face?
I think about this a lot, and I get asked this question a lot, and I find it very difficult to kind of pin it down to a single thing. The difficulty, as you know, or I won't say difficulty, one of the issues with ESG is it is multidisciplinary, and it cuts across topics and activities and functions, both inside your company and outside of your company. That is inherently a challenge for anybody. So maybe the right answer to the question is, and it doesn't matter if it's counsel or whoever, but just understanding what does ESG mean to your company, because it means different things to different companies who have different roles in the supply chain, different product services, to companies, and kind of where they're regulated geography-wise and jurisdiction-wise. So I think probably the biggest thing is just trying to figure out, what does it mean? And where are the boundaries, if there are boundaries? And then once you get that, then you can begin to manage it. But even that, there's tremendous challenges in managing it once you are able to draw a circle around what it all actually means.
And then the question is, who manages it? So does ESG belong in the legal department at an organization?
As you know, there's a lot of controversy around this point. There are a lot of folks who don't think that legal is the right home for ESG. I don't necessarily agree with that. Interestingly, since I do have a bit of a legal background, not being a lawyer, but and have worked with lawyers and legal departments throughout every step of my career, there are a lot of benefits. There's a lot of pluses to being housed in the legal department. There's certainly some challenges. And I think, a lot of times the legal department is viewed as the no department within companies, right? But there's a reason for that. And that's because they're risk averse, and their jobs is to help manage corporate risk and exposures and liability. Okay. With ESG right now, I think that's really, really important. I think it's important to manage that risk, because we're seeing things right now go in directions that people were not expecting. We're seeing a lot more litigation. We're seeing novel legal theories being thrown out at activities and communications and business decisions that were not things that we'd ever thought about in the past. Now, is legal the perfect place for it? I don't know if there really is a perfect place. Some people say, oh, you need to have a chief sustainability officer that reports to the CEO. And then there are others who say, no, the sustainability or the ESG function really needs to report to the chief financial officer, because it all kind of boils down to a financial decision. The thing is I think every company is absolutely different. And, I've worked as a consultant for hundreds and hundreds of different companies, ranging from Fortune 5 all the way down to just a few million in revenue. Every single one of them is different. They deal with their internal functions differently. There are different, if you will, power players within in the company. They're not all consistent. So I think what you have to do is you've got to look at companies at an individual basis and kind of make some decisions about, well, where do we think this fits? And you know what? Your first shot out of the gate about organization may not be right. And so you need to be flexible about that and say, you know what, we might want to consider moving it out of legal or into legal or, whatever. But that's a long answer, long-winded answer to your question. But I think one of the things that is critically important is legal absolutely has to be at the table. And they've got to be one of the top 2 or 3 at the table, like it or not, whether you think they're the no department. They serve a function, and they serve a very critical function, especially these days. And I think you do a disservice by not giving legal their due in ESG.
Yep, I completely agree. And I think no matter which internal department ESG lives, it comes with perception issues, right? Because if it lives in legal, then it's just a compliance and a risk mitigation issue. If it lives in marketing, it's a PR ploy. If it lives in the finance department, then it's just a reporting issue. So it always will have that misperception. But I think much like DE&I, sustainability or ESG is not a single person's job. It is the whole culture of the firm's role and implication. So it is a challenge to house it anywhere. And it's important to remember it's not a single person or single team's job, but everybody's responsibility to act sustainably and behave sustainably. So you touched on this a little bit earlier about, sort of new legal theories being bantered about and so forth. I would love your take on the current political environment around ESG and the anti-ESG movement and where you think that's going.
Yeah, that's funny. That's been a topic or a theme of a lot of the blogs I've been writing in the last couple of days. As a matter of fact, the one I have up on my screen right now kind of gets to this point too. I think from the beginning, well, when it first started, I certainly didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but to me, it seemed fairly early on that it was a lot of arm waving, and didn't have what I would consider a technical basis or a technical impact. And, I kind of come at things more from a technical perspective than I do anything else. And so I started feeling fairly early on that really what ESG professionals and practitioners, no matter where they are, what they needed to do was just, that kind of stuff is going to happen. It's going to do what it's going to do. You just need to focus on your daily job, kind of put it out of your mind and just do your work, not get distracted by it. And I think what we're seeing now, what I've started seeing now in the last couple of months, is that that's actually proven to be fairly good advice. I'll probably never be able to replicate offering up good advice in advance again, but I seem to have actually done that for once. And it wasn't just me, right? I mean, I think there were a lot of folks who actually understood what ESG was, and they saw the political arm waving and said, you know what, this is, it's almost like don't look at the man behind the curtain kind of thing. And I think that's where we are. And I think it's actually becoming more and more obvious now that it's kind of a nothing. It's a big nothing burger. And if you just keep doing your job, you know what, you're going to be okay. And you're going to be able to show what your value was to the company, as opposed to being distracted and worrying about things and then kind of not being able to show your efficacy.
Yep, yep. I love that phrase. It's a big nothing burger. Can I borrow that?
Absolutely.
I'll
I
give
didn't
you
make it
credit.
up. I got it from somewhere many years ago.
And I also feel like for those companies that, to your point earlier, that truly understand ESG, stay the course, live your truth. This is your purpose. This is your mission. This is why we're in businesses, and this is the way we're going to do business. And all the political rhetoric isn't going to change that core purpose of their business. And so they're going to stay the course. I think if you went into ESG on a whim, you're going to be affected by some of the political arm waving that's happening. But if you're doing ESG holistically and it's robust and it's part of your business, I think stay the course is the absolutely best advice.
I think that's really an important point that you bring up. And again, this is one that I harp on a lot. If you do ESG well within your company, and if you're committed to it, you actually have financial value. And I mean real dollars, real financial value without using what I call garbage economics.
Yep.
And you can show that. And there is no one who's going to say, oh, we don't like the fact that you're making more money for us. We don't like the fact that you're helping us manage our costs or improve efficiency or helping us engage in new markets. Nobody's going to say that. That's business. Those are business fundamentals. And if you keep your head down, you focus on those business fundamentals, really this whole ESG thing goes away. It simply is doing business.
Yeah.
And you, if as you said, which is a really good point, if you just jump into ESG just for the sake of jumping into ESG, these political wins are going to drive you crazy, and they're going to end up costing you, I think, probably a lot of money and a lot of opportunities. Certainly a distraction. But I'm not real sure how many companies are actually just jumping on board. I know there are some. But I think more and more we're starting to see that companies are not doing it just for window dressing and political purposes. Probably one of the reasons why is they're getting tired of being blown around by these political winds.
Yep. That's right. That's right. So we mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned the SEC and that was the founding of the CCRcorp and so forth. What do you anticipate the issuing of the SEC regs, assuming it happens later this fall? What impact is it going to have on U.S. businesses?
I think it's going to have a huge impact. I'm not going to comment on timing. I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
It'll be published when it's published.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. There are rumors out there. There have been prognostications, and I don't have any comment on any of that. I don't have any information. The point is that when it does get issued, it's going to be huge. Meredith Cross, the former Corp Fin director, has said this is the most significant rule that the SEC's ever promulgated, or has the potential to be. It cuts across everything, and especially if the rule does incorporate scope 3,
yes,
which I struggle to consider that it won't, and the reason why is because of what's going on in Europe. I think it would be a difficult sell and certainly difficult to implement if you had to do one thing for the SEC rule, but then had to do something else for the EU. And then, with as many multinationals as we have, and how the EU rule is going to actually affect US companies, I think it would just be incredibly difficult and not really unworkable, but it would be incredibly difficult if they weren't aligned.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also feel like in many respects, particularly multinationals, but many more US companies, we shouldn't be waiting for the SEC, because even if the SEC never issues its regs, so much of what's happening in the EU and the UK is going to affect us, either because we're multinationals or we are vendors and suppliers of those companies, and therefore are going to have to comply with these disclosure requirements. So yeah, it's not going away regardless of what the SEC does.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I'm quite convinced we're going to see a rule. I don't think the rule is going to just die on the vine. I think we're absolutely going to see a final release. There's no question parts, if not all of it, are going to get challenged in court. And then what happens with that, whether they get stayed during the challenge or whatever happens with that, we'll just have to see. But the point is that the other, and you touched on this, right? It's not just the regulatory aspect that is driving the need for companies to deal with this. There are, you've got some of these things have been embedded in loan covenants, for instance, supplier agreements, and PO terms and conditions. So there are a number of business drivers, and even in the EU, we've got the new due diligence regulations that are coming into effect that require supplier due diligence on a number of ESG issues. And it doesn't matter if those suppliers are located in the EU or here in the US or whether they're in Africa. If they're a supplier, then there's due diligence that you have to do on them for specific ESG matters. And so we're kind of, I don't want to, I'm oversimplifying and kind of almost making this a bit of a humorous point, but the regulatory compliance is almost a non-issue at this point. I know that's not true. I'm exaggerating, but the point is exactly what you said.
It's a non-issue, and it's also the bare minimum. So,
yes.
So at a minimum, that's what you're going to have to do, but your competitors are likely to do much more. So tell me what's next for practicalesg.com.
Well, we're continuing to build our resources. Our daily blog is the thing that most people see. It's free, and it's getting more and more widely read, where we hit on timely topics. But we have other resources too. We host podcasts, as you were a guest on ours quite recently. Thank you again for that. We've got podcasts, we have webcasts, we write detailed guidebooks similar to the way that CCRcorp does on securities issues, where folks can get really detailed understanding of various aspects of how they should be thinking about managing and implementing solutions for ESG. And then we have shorter guide checklists as well. So, and then we curate third-party content, the tsunami, the flood of information that's out there. It's just flooding everybody's inbox. And it's difficult to know what you should spend time reading and what you don't need to worry about, what's hype, what's marketing, what's just flat out wrong. And so we do that filtering. We do a tremendous amount of filtering and curate third-party content in an organized manner under topics, to help companies be able to say, look, if it's here, then it's probably something I want to pay attention to. Yep.
That's extremely helpful, by the way, because you're so right that there's so much information out there now, some of which is just wrong, that having a go-to source that experts have curated it is a huge value.
Yeah, I get questions. We've had questions about what bot do we use to filter, and I was taken aback by that. And I was like, me. Exactly. We use humans. We use old-fashioned human experts. We don't use artificial intelligence for any of this. Maybe that's, some could argue that's not the most efficient way of doing it. But, as you said, some of this is just flat out wrong. And we just need real live experts who know this stuff to be able to kind of sort through it. And that's the old-fashioned model we use.
So most of my podcasts, I would love to have you come back in a year and we'll have this conversation again. What will we be talking about?
Oh, no doubt the SEC rule.
Yeah,
absolutely no doubt the SEC rule.
In a year.
The thing is that we may not be talking about it in terms of the rule. We may be talking about it in terms of the legal challenges to the rule. We're also going to be talking about what's really happening in the EU with their due diligence requirements, their climate disclosure requirements, some of the other things. I would like to say we're going to be talking about carbon offset markets in a better light than we're talking about them now. I'm hopeful that we'll see some improvements, but I'm not particularly optimistic we're going to see improvements in the carbon markets. In terms of quality, consistency of pricing, consistency, and elimination of fraud or reduction of fraud. But I'm just not optimistic we're going to see that within a year's period. I think it's going to take a little bit longer than that. I think, and DEI. I think we're going to be talking about what's really going on with DEI. It's stuck. I don't want to say stuck. It's caught in between a lot of pressures, similar to ESG, but in many ways even more difficult. And I think we're going to be talking about that. And I kind of feel like we're going to be talking about anti-ESG movement in past tense. Because I feel like we're starting to get there already.
I definitely have sensed that as well. So that would definitely be a step in the right direction. So this has been incredibly valuable for our listeners. I want to make sure that they will know how to get a hold of you and how to find Practical ESG. So what advice would you give them?
So the website, pretty easy, practicalesg.com. It's one word, Practical ESG. And then you can get a hold of me through there. You can contact the editors through there. That's probably the easiest way to do it. If you really feel you want to contact me directly via email, it's LHEIM as in Mary at CCRcorp.com.
Excellent. I don't doubt that you will get people reaching out, and certainly people signing up for the newsletter who haven't yet done so, because the blog is really important. Thank you so much for your time and for your expertise and for your insights. And I look forward to having you back on the podcast in 1 year's time.
Thanks, Pam. I really did appreciate it. Enjoyed the chat.
Likewise. Take care.
Take care.